Welcome to When Football Began Again, the podcast that takes a nostalgic look at the Premier League era. Hello and welcome to episode 17 of When Football Began Again, the podcast that takes a nostalgic look at the Premier League era, back for its penultimate episode of this first series. Today's show is all about 1995-96, a classic Premier League season by any measure, and I am joined by two brilliant comedians and football fans, Aston Villa supporter Tony Jameson and Manchester United fan Phil Walker. They will be with me to discuss all things Fergie, Keegan, Stan Collymore and Graham Fenton very shortly. First, before we go any further, thank you to everybody who listened to last week's show. That was 47th in our all-time Premier League table, and Huddersfield Town, after untold technical issues getting the video done, eventually that landed on YouTube, and it's had a really nice response so far. So welcome if you are a Huddersfield fan who has just discovered the show this week. That feature will be back in our next series. 46th place is Bradford City. I've got some great guests lined up for that as well. So that feature will be back very soon. But welcome along. I hope you'll hang around, Huddersfield Town fans. At the end of today's show, there's also the results of the greatest Premier League Bosnian as well. That was another tight vote, but all will be revealed as to who your pick was for our all-time Premier League Bosnian in the Premier League of Nations Hall of Fame. But let's crack on with it. This, for me, is a formative season in my football history. This was my first sticker album. 95-96 was the season that preceded Euro 96. It was a classic title race. The characters, the storylines, a brilliant, brilliant season. I hope we've done it justice. I think we have. It's a really, really good episode. So sit back, enjoy 95-96 with Tony and Phil. Hello and welcome to When Football Began Again, the podcast that takes a nostalgic look at the Premier League era. Joining me today to discuss the 1995-96 season is comedian, Aston Villa fan and host of the Football Manager show for The Athletic, which means he literally now gets to play Football Manager for a living. It is Tony Jameson. Tony, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you, mate. I've been thoroughly enjoying these. I was saying to you before we started recording, I've been listening to these since you started dropping them. I'm absolutely loving them. So, like, to be on as a guest, I'm genuinely chuffed about that, to be honest. So, yeah, can't wait.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And it's great to have you on. And am I overplaying it? I mean, you are now playing Football Manager. I mean, are you living the dream that many of us as teenagers wished we could have done?
Oh, 100%. Just what would be a better dream, though, is not getting sacked as often as I am. That would be like, I'm living half the dream. I'm living someone's dream, but I'm not sure it's my full dream yet.
Also joining me is a comedian whose career has seen him perform overseas in war zones, on the seas, on cruise liners, and given he writes, directs, and stars in pantos across the country as well. It's only a matter of time before he's under the sea. It's Manchester United fan wearing his colours, Phil Walker. How are you, Phil?
Very well, Carl. How are you?
I'm very good.
Tony.
I'm very good.
Hello, Phil. Pleasure to see you as always, mate.
Before we go any further, Tony, let's start with you. What do we need to know about you in the summer of 1995?
Oh, it was my time. It's my time. I'm coming. I'm a 15-year-old Oasis boy. Like, come on, like, what else do you need to know? Like, this is a defining era in the life of Tony Jameson.
And given as well, I mean, we've had Masai Graham, who's a huge Newcastle fan, despite being from West Bromwich. You are a Villa fan with a Northeast twang to your voice. Give us a story there.
Awkward child growing up, I think is probably the best way of saying it. So, like, I'm from a little place called Washington, which is like literally equidistant between Sunderland and Newcastle, and everyone in that town is black and white or red and white. I, aged about 7, just went, claret and blue is a nice colour, and Aston Villa's a bit different. So I was like, I'll go and be them. I'll support Villa. And the thing is, though, what's really interesting is that there was 2 other families in the street that we're from, both sets of twins, right? And they both started supporting Villa as well, unbeknownst to me. And we just, when we were playing football, we sort of found out, like, I'd turn up the shirt on, they'd turn up the shirt. I was like, you Villa shirts as well? Like, oh, yeah, we support Villa as well. I hadn't thought about this for years. Maybe we're talking like 7 or 8 years ago or something now. Like, I went to Villa Newcastle, like, because I live down York now, and I got the ticket sent up to my mum's house because that's where my booking registration was from. So when I turned up to my mum's, I'm like, "But where's my ticket for the match?" She's like, "I don't know. There's no tickets turned up." And I was like, "You know, when you have a bit of a brainwave, you're like, I wonder if one of those families still lives in the bottom of the street And I went and I knocked on the door. I went, "You haven't possibly got a ticket for the match, have you?" And they were like, "Yeah." Wondered why there was a spare one turned up. And I was like, "That's my ticket." So the club had obviously thought there's no way that there was two sets of Villa fans would live in the same street in Washington. So yeah, there you go. That's security of Villa. Just go. It's probably wrong.
Well, let's hope the ticketing office has got more efficient as the years have passed.
I'm sure it has.
And Phil, same question for you, really. Tell us about Phil Walker in 1995, and when did you discover Manchester United were the team for you?
Well, 95, I was 10 years older and an Oasis fan than Tony. 25 I was then. You know, it was magic. I just started doing comedy. I was out and about doing open spots and comedy competitions and stuff like that. And so, yeah, I'd started my journey with that. Yeah, Man United have always been sort of my team, really, since I was a kid, because my dad's a Man United fan, lifelong fan. And around about 92, I think it was 93, actually, we got our season ticket. And we both we were season ticket holders till 2010. Previous to that, 92, my dad was doing a summer season. My dad's Roy Walker, the listeners don't know. And he was doing a summer season in Blackpool, doing his show there on the North Pier. It was another guy on there called Norman Collier. I don't know whether you remember him. He was an old Yorkshire Hull comedian. He was quite famous in the day. My dad had been asked to do a charity show for Manchester United with Norman, and they were invited along to do this late night show at Old Trafford. So my dad, I was still living at home at the time, and my dad said to me, "Why don't you come along? If you want, you can get up and do 10 minutes and introduce us both." You know, I'd only done like talent competitions at that point. This was like 3 years before I'd done anything. So it was like one of the first times I'd been on. Surreal thing now when I look back on it. We were picked up by car at North Pier in Blackpool, taken to Blackpool Airport, where we were then taken into a helicopter. The three of us flew and landed on the centre circle at Old Trafford at like 11 o'clock at night. So all the floodlights were on and everything. Bobby Charlton met us on the pitch, and then we went up and we did this charity show for Bobby Charlton's charities with all these guests and stuff. Pilot that was with us was like James Bond. He just unzipped his like pilot gear and he had a black tie on underneath, like James Bond tuxedo. There was a couple of balls on the pitch. I said to Sir Bobby, I said, would it be all right if we had a kickabout? So me and my dad had a kickabout and I scored a goal at the Stretford end. There was no one in goal at the time because it was like midnight, but I did get to score a goal at Old Trafford. Still counts. I'm counting it, yeah. So I was like living the fantasy thing, running around the pitch with my hands in the air. Not long after that, we got our season tickets. Fans ever since just went for years and years. As the comedy sort of took more off, the last few years, I would say I was giving my ticket away once every other week. So that's why I packed it in the end, because it was just one. As Tony knows and yourself, once you have kids, that expense becomes an expense that you don't really need anymore. So, but we had the glory years, all the wonderful years, including this 95, 96 year. Obviously, we had our tickets then.
It's also as well, when you get family, you start looking at the kids going, do I want to pass this misery on to them? Let's look for a new sport. That's a good idea. Let's look for something new. You don't need to suffer the way we did.
I mean, if you weren't going to be besotted with a theatre of dreams, scoring a goal with a World Cup winner, that's gonna do it for you. Amazing.
When I look back on it, you take things for granted. I think when you're a bit younger as well, when you're in your 20s, you think. But when I look back on it now, I just think what an honour that was.
You don't want to be seen to be fanboying too much either, do you? So you have to
no.
At the time. You're like, oh yeah, just scored a goal at Stretford End in front of Sir Bobby Charlton, whatever. And then like getting home, going, oh my god, that really happened.
I know, it's crazy when I look back on it now.
The slimmed-down FA Carling Premiership consists of 20 teams in 95-96 for the first time, with Middlesbrough rejoining the party after a 2-year hiatus, alongside Bolton, who were back in the top flight for the first time in 15 years. The season kicks off with a Charity Shield, where FA Cup holders Everton beat Blackburn 1-0 in front of just over 40,000 fans at Wembley, the lowest attendance since the showpiece fixture moved to the National Stadium in 1974. Both teams will have decent seasons, but get nowhere near an epic title race that we're going to focus on in the first section of this show. Manchester United's campaign to win back the title that Blackburn had taken from them the previous season gets off to the worst possible start with a 3-1 defeat at Villa Park. Goals from future Red Devil Dwight Yorke, Ian Taylor and debutant Milosevic, combining with Mark Draper, give the Villains a 3-1 win. A promising youngster called David Beckham hits a long-range reply for Fergie's men. It famously won't be the last goal he scores from outside the box on opening day, but more of that next episode. Of course, this match has now spawned the infamous "You'll win nothing with kids" line on Match of the Day from Alan Hansen. Phil, on paper, Fergie's shipped out more players than he's brought in. He's let go a lot of experience from this team. He's trusting in what we now know to be the class of 92 to win back the title. Even after this result, he doesn't flinch. Did that seem like madness to you at the time, or did you trust in his genius?
Well, I don't know about trusting in his genius. Everyone believed in him. Obviously, it was because he had this aura about him, even though it was still kind of early on in his managerial stint at Manchester United. But the buzz around, I remember the buzz as you walked into the Theatre of Dreams at Old Trafford. At that time, it was electric. You know, all these young guys that came through, your Giggsies and Beckham and Scholes and all these, they just seemed in tune with each other, and there was just an energy and an invincibility about them. So as far as bringing in new players, I don't think we really needed them. You know, it was, people used to say, well, you know, we've got those 11 players on the pitch, and then you'd look across to the bench, you know, and the bench was just like, they would get in any first team. You know, at that time, we just had such strength in numbers, which is what you need when you're playing for all those trophies.
They would go on to prove themselves, as we know. I mean, Tony, folklore has dictated this match is best remembered, A, for Alan Hansen's comments, and B, Man United's youthful team sheet. But as a Villa fan, how is it remembered among Villa fans?
Let's not forget the grey kit as well. That was the debut of the infamous "You Can't Win in the Grey Kit." That came out. As a Villa fan, Villa fans still shake their heads at this match because I don't think Villa were expecting to win 3-1 at all. Like, look, I've just pulled the Villa team up actually to sort of see what we sort of put out. Like, and I guess, you know, you're saying there, Phil, you got this synergy, this youth setup that's going to come through into the first team. They've all played together for years. They know how each other works. Ferguson at that time, not just buying a player for the sake of it, going like, I'll buy someone who's better than what I've already got. Villa had players like Carl Tyler, Gareth Farrelly, Ricardo Scamacca was someone who was just popping through for Villa, and we got, oh, he sounds fancy and exotic. He was from Leicester, I think. Like, that's how fancy and exotic we got. Obviously, we had Dwight Yorke, Bosnich in goal, but Savo was the big one. Like, Savo was the guy. This, you know, this at the time would have been classed as Yugoslavian striker, turning up, very sort of like swanky. He had a bandana. So we're going, get them in the club shop. We'll sell them off. That's gonna be brilliant. And he turned up, he scored a goal. We're like, oh, this is amazing. This is like the dawn of a new age. But we didn't have the same dawn of a new age that you had. And to be fair, there was still maybe that little sort of feeling in the air, because it was only a couple of years previous. Remember that you won the first ever Premier League title and Villa were second. Like, so it was still in that time of what might have been. Like, you know, had Villa won the first title, that match at Villa Park has a completely different complexion on it. And it's only 3 years removed. But then you look now, 30 years removed, and like things could have been all so different. Yeah, we enjoyed that result, but I think even then we were going, right, who are we playing next? Because this is not going to happen again.
Meanwhile, on opening day, it's a goal-scoring start for Les Ferdinand and his new side in a 3-0 win for Newcastle over Coventry. Reigning champions Blackburn win 1-0 through an Alan Shearer penalty, while Stan Collymore's debut goal is the difference for Liverpool at home to Sheffield Wednesday. They fall to an absolute thunderbastard, I believe is a technical term, from Tony Yeboah at Ellen Road a few days later. Newcastle start the season on fire and win 7 of their first 8 games to top the table at the beginning of October. That's when a certain Eric Cantona returns from his lengthy ban to face Liverpool on the 1st of October. The Frenchman struts out of the tunnel at Old Trafford in front of a sea of French flags before assisting Nicky Butt's opener after just 2 minutes, and then equalises from the spot to rescue a point and leave the Red Devils 4 points off the pace. As one fan says to the Sky Sports cameras, God's back. Phil, what do you remember about that game and the long-awaited return of King Eric Cantona?
Well, I was actually at that game. When he came back out, it was like that movie Gladiator. Imagine being in those days in Rome at the Colosseum. It was literally like that. He just walked out. And he just walked out like, I own this place. This is, people thought he was like cocky and arrogant. And maybe he wasn't in a way, but he backed it up so well. He was just amazing, and he had this aura about him. You see some certain players, and they're great players, but the really, really super great players, the Messis and people like that. Cantona, he just seemed to have that extra moment on the ball. The ball seemed to glue to him. People kind of froze around him, and you could see players looking at him as if they were in awe of him. The opposition players. He was the final piece in the jigsaw for Manchester United. I think all those young players that we've mentioned that were coming through, they looked up to him, and the way he trained, the way he looked after himself, because he was a super fit individual. He had it all. I think those players, he just took them to his level along with him. Your Giggsies and Sharp and all those players that came through, they had him to look up to, and what an amazing thing to have.
I think one of the things that I enjoyed about Cantona was kind of like looking back now. Obviously, we're in an age where we didn't have access to internet gossip 24/7. Like, he arrived, like, I believe he went on trial at Sheffield Wednesday when he originally turned into the Premier League. Didn't get signed by Sheffield Wednesday because they played on a plastic pitch. So the manager at the time was going, well, we want to see what he's like on grass. Like, then he ends up at Leeds, and then he has a season at Leeds, ends up at United. So prior to Sheffield Wednesday, not many people had really heard of Cantona. And then this enigma just arrives. Like, he's just there, and he's so good, and like, no one's ever seen anything like this before. And then he goes. As quickly as he came, he goes. And you're like, where's he gone? Nobody knows. He just lives in the mountains now. You're like he's literally like, he has his own like imagery, isn't he? It's just incredible. Like, doesn't consider coaching, doesn't consider punditry or whatever. He's just like, no, I'm gone. Bye everyone. Like, and it only Cantona can do.
It becomes a movie star for a short while. Let's not forget as well.
He's one of those guys. He just got out at the very top. He just went, "This is me at my peak. I can't get any better than this." And he just walked away. He didn't want to go down and play in the lower leagues or just come on as a sub now and again. That wasn't Cantona. Players like that, like Cristiano, and they have to be the main men. Otherwise, it just doesn't happen for them. And I think that's what he was. He was the main man.
So missed towards the end of the 94-95 season by Manchester United. He's now back. He's going to have a huge impact on this season. So on November the 4th, Manchester United lose 1-0 at Highbury to a Dennis Bergkamp goal, while Newcastle beat Liverpool 2-1 at St James's to leave Keegan's men 5 points clear at the top. Les Ferdinand continues his run of scoring in every home game since his big money move, but it's a late goal from Steve Watson pouncing on a David James error that wins the game. It won't be the last time there's late drama in the Liverpool-Newcastle fixture in 95-96, of course, but a little bit more on that later. Liverpool and Manchester United meet again in December. Fergie's men lose 2-0 and follow that with a 3-1 defeat at Ellen Road. Meanwhile, Newcastle beat Everton and Forest to sit 10 points clear on Christmas Day. Manchester United will beat Newcastle to reduce that in the days after Christmas, with Andy Cole on the score sheet against his former side in a 2-0 win, but the Red Devils capitulate to a 4-1 defeat at White Hart Lane on New Year's Day and drop points at home to Villa, while Newcastle return to winning ways. Tony, Newcastle's attacking style and general likability of their manager and players contrasted with a bit of a anyone but Man United movement that was beginning to grow in the 90s with some fan bases. I mean, what was that the case for you? Were you Newcastle or Man United in this season?
Can I play down? Can I go down the middle? Because I was raised a Sunderland fan, so I don't care how good this Newcastle team was, how likable this Newcastle team was, how exceptional it was when it was playing, and it was fantastic to watch. And you know what? And their kit was really nice as well. I don't want any of that. I don't care. They were a different level. They were a different level. Like, they were just playing football that, without sounding really parochial, football the Northeast hadn't seen before. Like, I know, and we just, anyone in the Northeast, feel like you're probably the same like in Manchester as well. Like, you want players to just play for the shirt, to understand what it means to play for the club. And whatever they were putting in the tea at Newcastle in 95, 96, like, the players just got it. They bought into it. They just went. And like, it was Keegan just inspiring it, and the fans got on board. It just, the whole 90s vibe just swept at the right time. It just felt like that wave of euphoria. It just caught Newcastle, and they went, right, okay, this is the time for us to elevate ourselves. Sunderland could have done the same thing. I think we're going to talk later on about another North East club who again pick up that 90s mantle and try and push themselves higher up the table by opportunity. And fair play, they did it. And you're right, they were playing some wonderful stuff. And then we talk about, it's going to be a player that we're going to talk about who comes in again, who you just go, who signed?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. This is madness.
The Premier League is really hitting its stride at this point in the season. By the 20th of January in 1996, Newcastle United are infamously 12 points clear of their Manchester rivals with just 15 games to play, which is the perfect moment to leave that seemingly unassailable lead there. Just one note, though. The Spurs Man United 4-1 on New Year's Day. Now, a lot of people hadn't got Sky Sports, including in my house, but I remember this match because it was New Year's Day, and I don't remember us going round our next door neighbours before or since, but somehow my dad wangled it and we went round and watched Spurs win 4-1. I think we were just using them for their satellite dish, and what a memorable game that was. So moving on to the top scorers for this season, where a familiar name is top of the charts, despite his side being some way off the pace, and a few new names replace the old guard. Out go Letitia, Rösler, Saunders and Sutton from the previous season's top scorers, and in come Dublin, Kanchelskis, Armstrong, York, and a return for Eric Cantona. So here's the top 11 in full. I'll count it up in a chart show vibe. So Dion Dublin, Stan Collymore and Eric Cantona are all joint ninth with 14 goals each. Bearing in mind, Cantona missed the first 2 months of the season. Stan Collymore, perhaps a modest return for his big money fee from Forest. In joint sixth is Chris Armstrong, Andre Kanchelskis, who's at Everton now, and Ian Wright with 15 goals each. Fifth place and fourth place is two future Manchester United strikers, Teddy Sheringham with 16 and Dwight York with 17. Worth noting that Dwight York also got 10 assists this season, which is a pretty impressive return. And Les Ferdinand is third with 25 goals, a great return for his new side and money well spent. Robbie Fowler, a youthful Robbie Fowler with 28 goals, is the runner-up to Alan Shearer with 31 goals. He becomes the first player to hit 30 plus in the top flight in 3 consecutive seasons since the early 1930s. So, Tony, I mean, Alan Shearer can't hit a barn door for England going into Euro 96, but he gets over half of Blackburn's goals this season in what will be his final season at Ewood. I mean, even for 15 million in 1996, how do you replace that? Obviously, Blackburn clearly struggled to.
For context, £15 million got you Zinedine Zidane at that time. So you can't, and that's the thing. I don't think, looking back now, you can quantify just how big that transfer was. Like, was it a season before when Keegan was on the steps at St James's Park having to convince Newcastle fans that selling Andy Cole was going to work out fine because there was mutiny at that point. Like, Andy Cole had scored 40 goals plus in Division 1 to go up into the Premier League beforehand, and he's saying, look, £7 million plus Keith Gillespie, right? It'll all work out. It'll be fine. Fans are furious. Their number 9's gone. Cut forward 18 months later, they've smashed the world record transfer fee, and you get Alan Shearer, who's returning home, and all of a sudden it's this prodigal son returns. He stands out on the steps, and it's like, and the place is full. Doing it nowadays, it's like replacing Messi, like at Messi's prime, not like Messi when he leaves 2 years ago. This is Messi, prime Messi, leaves and he joins his boyhood club, like, and then they're there, and they're like, but again, the boyhood club have to be at the top level, so it's the other way around. Like, there's literally no comparison. Who do you replace? Whoever they get, it's just not going to work.
Shearer's goals, I mean, so crucial to Blackburn. They're really going to struggle without him. I mean, Phil, it's a recurring theme on this show about Shearer and Manchester United. He famously turned Fergie down, not once, but twice. I do have to always preface this by saying he maintains he never regretted it. He did still have a wonderful career at Newcastle before all the Newcastle fans kick off. How good would he have been in that Man United team, do you think, if you'd have put that prime Alan Shearer in Old Trafford?
I'm not too sure if he would have fit in. I know he would have scored goals, but he was a very physical player, Shearer. You know, we used to call him elbows. He's always elbowing people. I don't know. He did score a lot of goals. We never really saw him in Europe. How good would he have been in Europe? You know, like you say, he was struggling for England on the big stages to score goals there. The strikers that we brought in, the Dwight York and Andy Cole duo, was amazing. But, you know, your Van Nistelrooy, who was a tall striker, Teddy Sheringham, when he came in, an out-and-out goal-poaching striker with a lot of style and a lot of class. I think they sort of suited our way of playing at that time. And I know Alan Shearer would have scored goals, but I don't think he was what you would call a United player, in my opinion.
See, I get that. But then I look at this. I look at the amount of goals Alan Shearer scored in, and apologies to Newcastle fans who are listening, right? Okay. A team that doesn't achieve anything. And there's times when Newcastle are down near the bottom and he's still banging them in and he's not getting tap-ins. He's getting that famous volley against Everton that drops and whacks it. All types of goals. I'm trying to think of another player who,
couldn't you say the same for Harry Kane?
Yeah, Kane's the perfect example right now, but I don't think Tottenham have ever slipped as low as Newcastle did, where Shearer was still getting the goals, even coming back from injury. You've got pace, you've got power. Him getting on the end of Beckham crosses would have been, in the Premier League, would have been lethal. If he doesn't score, Andy Cole taps in. We're saying who to replace at Blackburn. He's not quite at that level, but you're looking at R9 Ronaldo for the way that he plays. That's who you need to be looking at to replace. And once you've got £15 million in your pocket in that period of time, all of a sudden every football club goes, oh, our striker just got £5 million more expensive, didn't they? And you're not going to... And look at what happens with transfer fees going now. You were never going to be able to replace Shearer like for like and still have change.
He went to his boyhood club, which is totally understandable. I think there must be a part of him that regrets not going to United. I know he won one Premier League. Think how much more he could have won the European Cup, etc., at Old Trafford. It's all about, when you look back, what you won. And he was at the very top of his tree, very top of his game. I bet he wished he had, Wayne Rooney's trophy room.
Probably wished he had David May's trophy room, to be honest.
yeah.
Well, Tony, towards the bottom of the league, Dion Dublin has a similar impact to Shearer for Coventry, scoring a third of their goals. Venables will go with Shearer, Sheringham, Ferdinand and Fowler as his out-and-out strikers for Euro 96. Is Dion Dublin maybe unlucky not to be joining them?
I think so. I think this, again, is the time of a lot of eyes are coming onto football at this point. There's a new generation of football fans are coming on, and we see it today as well. At the time, Dion Dublin wasn't fashionable. A striker playing for Coventry, with all due respect for Coventry at the time, again, you're seeing these football fans going, he plays for Coventry. They're down near the bottom. Yeah, he's scoring goals there. Sometimes he plays centre-back. He can't be that good. He's playing centre-back. No, that's really useful. If you can put a centre-forward. And gone are those days when a centre-forward could play centre-back. I long for those days again now. You're right, not knowing what you've got in front of you. And it's a different option. I know it's probably a cliche to say. You could put Dublin on. He could do something a bit different. He's big. He's strong. He can get involved. And he had desire. And sometimes that counts for more than ability. He went on the pitch, he would just give a bit, that extra 2%, 3% that maybe, your superstar player has anyway. He gets too close to that level. If that makes sense?
Yeah. I mean, he broke his neck and came back from that, didn't he?
Some of the setbacks he's come back from, and longer as well. I think he ended with broken legs or knee injuries as well. And to have a long career, I guess he's one of those guys you could probably make an entire team of players who were great, but just when you looked at them, went, I don't really know. But you look back and you go, but actually they were brilliant.
And of course, Eric Cantona goes on to a movie career. Dion Dublin now, Homes Under the Hammer. So you can't.
So he played the long game, didn't he? He won in the
end. He knew the property boom was coming before the Hollywood boom.
And he invented the tube. Which other international striker has invented a sort of box-shaped musical instrument? Nobody.
Dion Dublin, a man of many talents. On that list, of course, there's Andrei Kanchelskis, obviously revitalised at Goodison for a little while, and one player who might have once seemed a certainty for Euro 96, Andy Cole, but his 11 goals in 32 Premier League games leaves him actually behind David Hurst and level with Robbie Earle in the goal-scoring charts this season, and is not enough to earn him a place at Euro 96 with Terry Venables. So we're going to move on to the second half of the title race now. Despite averaging 2 goals a game, Newcastle add Faustino Asprilla to their attacking talents mid-season. The Colombian arrives in a literal northeast blizzard, and the headline writers enjoy delving into tales of his past antics with porn stars, guns and drugs, or as teammate Peter Beardsley calls them, Tuesdays. Eric Cantona scored from the unlikeliest of angles at Upton Park to secure what will be the first of 10 wins in Manchester United's next 11 11 games that will stretch from the end of January beyond Easter. Cantona will score in 8 of them, most of which are decisive goals. His legend at Old Trafford continues to grow. Alex Ferguson's mind games begin as he suggests Newcastle's tricky away fixtures coming up will be pivotal, and says every game from March onwards is hard when you're in a title race. How right he'll prove to be. I mean, Phil, do Man United just release the handbrake here? They've got a 12-point deficit. There's nothing to lose. The title looks gone at one stage. Then they hit this rich vein of form. Is that kind of how you might explain this run of form?
Yeah, I think around that time as well, United, we seem to win a lot of games in the last 5 or 10 minutes. We'd be like 1-0 down sometimes, or 0-0, 2-1 down, whatever. And a lot of teams, that's when they switch off and they think, oh, we've won now, we'll just play it safe. United have always been, even to today, very good on the counter and super fit. And I think with Cantona bringing all his strengths through with these young players, the fitness levels, I think we were probably the fittest side in the Premier League. They ran their hearts out right till the 99th minute of Fergie time. Once they got on that roll, I think, like you say, the handbrake was off, and winners, they sniff victory. It's like Stephen Hendry at that time as a snooker player against Jimmy White. We all wanted Jimmy to win, but as soon as Hendry got that sniff of victory, he was just ruthless and won. And that's what United did, and I think that's what winners do.
And looking back now, like obviously at the time, a lot of people, you mentioned Fergie time there, a lot of people, the neutrals or the home fans were going, 95th minute, of course United have got a penalty, 95th minute. They always do that. But looking back at it now with like a bit more sort of like context, you mentioned the fitness levels, a team that is pressing for 95 minutes, that mental capability of your opposition, having to stay focused constantly, not making a mistake. You're tiring. You've got Giggs on one arm. You've got Beckham on the other. You're looking after Cantona. Yeah. Andy Cole's moving off here all and over the place. Lose focus for half a second. You've got a leg dangling out. It's a penalty. Like, because you're getting that many people in the box. Like, you can't play against that much pressure for 97 minutes and not give a mistake away. And everyone kept saying, oh yeah, the refs are in United's pocket. It's not. It's just you battered teams into submission. Even when you weren't playing well, you had 2, 3, 4 gears extra. Newcastle were learning this at the time, that unless they were winning from the start, they didn't have the capabilities to unlock a team who could sit in what we now call a low block and just sit back and go, right, break us down. Like, they would struggle with that. Whereas United always had a way, or if they didn't have a way, the opposition would just crumble and a way would be presented to them.
The psychological strength, I think, as you touch on there as well, Phil, they just kept going. When Cantona's late brace at Wimbledon secures the points in February, Martin Tyler observes that he goes into the Selhurst Park crowd again, but for all the right reasons, as he's embraced by his public this time. Meanwhile, Tino Asprilla comes off the bench at Middlesbrough with Newcastle trailing 1-0 to help turn the game around in the final 20 minutes. It will be the Toon Army's last win away from home for almost 3 months, in a run that sees them lose at West Ham, Arsenal, Liverpool and Blackburn, as well as falling behind 3 times at relegation-haunted Man City in a 3-3 draw, as their title charge begins to falter and that 12-point lead also begins to dissolve. Asprilla gets a ban and a fine for elbowing and then headbutting Keith Curle in the face during that same match. Tony, Tino Asprilla is wonderfully unhinged at the best of times, but can you think of anything in football that shows less concern for self-preservation than headbutting Keith Curle?
Tino Asprilla is a law unto himself, I guess is the thing. Like, you're right. I mean, we've mentioned that he turns up in a snowstorm, right? Okay, he's come from Parma, Colombian forward, turns up in a snowstorm going, what on earth is this? Then he turns up against Middlesbrough going, I can clearly play a bit. There you go, do that. And then obviously Newcastle go, where do we put him? Doesn't matter. I'll get myself suspended. You can work it out in a few weeks. Try and work out where I fit in this pitch. Keith Curle, of all the people to pick a fight with, Keith Curle.
Did you get the memo?
Yeah, like Tino Asprilla is like just looking around, just going, who's the hardest lad at school? Right, I'm going to run to him and punch him. And then I'm going to see what happens. And it turns out they're going to batter you like later on. Keegan must have been sat there just going, oh, Oh, well. Now what?
He seems like a foolproof addition to this Newcastle side. Obviously, it's perhaps not going to quite work out. On the 4th of March, 1996, Manchester United head to St James's Park. At this point, they are 4 points behind, having played a game more than their hosts. An electric atmosphere at St James's is generated in a bid to see the Geordies home. But Eric Cantona's far post volley into the ground and beyond Pavel Cernicek is enough to close the gap to just a point. Keegan remains bullish at this point in the post-match interview, but Fergie sees his side go top for the first time in 6 months with a 1-0 win against Arsenal, and it's followed by a 1-0 win against Spurs. The winner, by the way, against Spurs is scored by Cantona seconds after Spurs are denied an obvious corner at 0-0 live on Sky Sports, much to the dismay of Andy Gray and co-commentary, the fine margins on which championships are won and lost. So let's get to that famous match at Anfield. It is effectively Newcastle's game in hand. They've been carrying it for a little while. They actually go into the game with 2 games in hand on Manchester United while trailing them by 3 points. The title is effectively still in their hands with 7 games to play if they can at least get a point. Robbie Fowler gives Liverpool the lead after just 2 minutes. Ferdinand equalises and then assists Ginola to make it 2-1 in the 14th to lift Keegan off his seat in an appalling maroon-coloured blazer that makes him look like a holiday park entertainer. Liverpool then descend on Newcastle before Fowler gets his second in the 55th minute. Phil, has there ever been a time when Manchester United have wanted Liverpool to win this badly before or since? And were you watching this game? Can you remember the famous ding-dong at Anfield?
I don't think I remember watching the game, no, but I don't think we've ever wanted them to win. I think there's always been that rivalry between Man United and Liverpool, even though it's because of all of the leagues that they won and the leagues that we've won. I know Man City have been playing brilliant the last few years, but they've still got a lot to catch up with those two. And I think there is always that feistiness. I don't think that feistiness between Man United and Man City on those derby games is the same level as a Liverpool Man United game. I think there's just that extra spice there. I mean, Liverpool, when they thrashed us, was it 7 or 8-0 or something like that? You know, I stopped watching. Well, I turned the sound down after 4-0. But they seem to bring themselves up a level when they play United.
So even against Newcastle in this match, you'd have been happier with the Newcastle win and what it might have meant for Man United's title aspirations.
I'll take the 5th on that.
I'd like the fixture to be declared null and void if possible.
Yeah.
And you got big, again, not by today's standards, but big TV numbers because, as you've alluded to previously on the podcast, not everyone had Sky at the time. Like, this is a huge match that a lot of people will say they've watched, and they didn't. They didn't watch it at all. They've seen the highlights and they know what happens, but they didn't see the game. What a game it was, though. I mean, we're talking about Asprilla comes on, little dink up over the top. He gets himself a goal. Those high lines. The match was played in this part of the park. Like, both defenses were on the D of the halfway line. It was just absolutely wild to watch. Liverpool weren't in the title race at all, so what they're doing, throwing everything forward to help United out, I've got no idea. Newcastle are going, we're fine, we'll do this, gung-ho, and then, as we've seen time and time again, 3-3 doesn't mean that you've got that point, and then the ball goes down the line, and we all know the commentary bit.
And Liverpool were sort of at this point, I mean, they've kind of been on the edges, but never really in the title race. They're always sort of a couple of wins back, but kind of in touching distance. I mean, as you say, Newcastle respond in the only way they know how, with brilliant attacking play, the words of Martin Tyler, at the peak of his powers in 1996. Tino Asprilla bends the ball around an inexplicably onrushing David James, by the way, when you rewatch that. I'm not quite sure what David James is doing out there.
This isn't even Mario Kart David James either, is it? This is David James when he's focused. He hasn't even discovered the Nintendo yet, so he's like still.
It would have been like one of those rockets because he's straight off the line at this point. Collymore pulls Liverpool level again in the 68th minute at the far post. Then comes a moment of iconic commentary. Barnes, Rush, Barnes, still John Barnes, Collymore closing in. Liverpool lead in stoppage time. Kevin Keegan hangs his head. He's devastated. If those words don't bring back the evocative images of that night, then please pause this and go and watch it. The camera shakes. Anfield shakes to its foundations. Collymore bounds away while the Geordie heads are in hands. Keegan slumps over the advertising hoardings in an iconic image. One small crumb of comfort, he's no longer wearing the blazer. Tony, we've already touched on it. It's one of the Premier League's early moments where every penny Sky Sports have invested to broadcast this match into homes and pubs around the country is paid back in spades. Is this the best 90 minutes of Premier League football there's ever been?
Oh, there's a question. There's a question, because you've got some incredible games. That's the first. I'd say that's the first one. I would say that is absolutely the first one. You go there about that iconic commentary there, Collymore closing in. That is the Aguero moment for the 90s. Like, that commentary, it will never be repeated. That moment will never happen again. That level of atmosphere will never happen again. 4-3 Liverpool Newcastle. Could be, Carl. It could be the Premier League's greatest game.
It could be. I'd be intrigued. I mean, if you're listening and you're thinking there's games we've missed, pop it in the comments.
I think there's possibly Newcastle fans would look at the 5-0 against Man United. They'd take that. But I think for the neutral 4-3 Liverpool, that's got to be up there, surely.
Yes, yeah. No, an incredible game of football, and one of those ones that you can just watch again and again. Really, really fantastic football. A few weeks later, Newcastle lose at Blackburn, with two former Wallsend Boys graduates combining to condemn them to a 2-1 defeat. Alan Shearer actually assists both goals in a brace for late substitute Graham Fenton. Remember him? Both goals.
Play for Villa.
He did indeed. Both goals come in the last 5 minutes. Fenton had scored just once that season before this match. It's almost like Shearer hasn't got the heart to twist the knife himself, so let's Graham do his dirty work for him. The wheels are well and truly coming off to leave the Magpies 6 points behind Fergie's men. Keegan, shell-shocked, paradoxically says, I would like us to finish runners-up if we can't win it. This club has never finished runners-up for a long time. So already the defeatism is beginning to creep in with Kevin Keegan. Meanwhile, Manchester United's charge is briefly halted in a 3-1 defeat at the Dell in a game where they wear a different kit either side of half-time. Now, we have referenced it, but Phil, give us the story for any younger listeners as to why Manchester United played one half of football in one kit and one half of football in another.
According to the players, they didn't suggest it, but Fergie came in an absolute strop, throwing stuff around and stuff, and told them all to get changed because he thought that the sunlight, because it was quite a sunny day, was reflecting off the grey, silvery, horrible away kit. In his mind, he thought they couldn't see each other. They weren't picking each other out for passes, etc. So he told them to change into the dark blue strip so they'd be able to see each other. Having read about some of the players, that they didn't seem to mind it. They were just playing a bad game. Obviously, it worked because maybe he saw something that they didn't, watching on.
It goes down historically. I don't think you ever won in that kit as well. I think there is that I think you maybe won about sort of 6 or 7 times. I'm sure that United never won in that grey.
Yeah, well,
kit.
England had a similar thing, didn't they? They had that horrible grey kit, and they classically ditched it because similar thing. Maybe there was something in it.
But yeah, Gareth Southgate famously wearing that a few months later when he misses his penalty. Manchester United do.
He was looking at himself while he hit it.
He couldn't see himself. He was just like, "Where have I gone? I was here a minute ago."
They get back to winning ways against Leeds, with Fergie openly questioning why Leeds tried so hard against Manchester United. You wait and see the difference against Newcastle, he adds, while struggling to conceal a smirk. He sees his side demolish Nottingham Forest in their final home game, 5-0. Ahead of the final weekend of the season, he will now sit back and watch Newcastle attempt to overturn a 6-point and 7-goal difference advantage with their 2 games in hand. It leads to one of Monday Night Football's most iconic moments as Keegan's men win the first of 3 games in 7 days at Ellen Road. Tony, I'll give a bit more detail of it in a moment. What do you remember about Kevin Keegan's rant?
He was, again, living in the Northeast. You could see the pressure had got to him. It wasn't getting to him. It had got to him. Fergie was sat almost like Mr. Burns, like in like an ivory tower, just excellent. Like, this is all going according to plan. And because just Ferguson was puppeteering the whole thing, and Keegan was desperate so desperate for success. Newcastle fans, desperate for success. They'd spent all this money. They were playing expansive football. They were great to watch. They didn't know when they were going to get another chance to do this again. And I think United knew that if they didn't get it, next year they're back in that conversation again. Newcastle had never been in that conversation before. So to get to that point, it's going, we've got to get it. We've got to get it now. Like, we've not won a trophy for, I think at the time it was something like 40 years, maybe also since the Fairs Cup. Obviously that has gone on and on and on. Manchester United, of course, continued to be incredibly successful for a long period of time. And it just showed that moment of Ferguson understanding he'd been there before. He knew how to play the situation. The media, he was playing to his benefit. Keegan was usually a pretty suave character, and like he could sort of like play things off, and people liked him and they talked to him and they'd give like some little sound bites and that. But this was the moment when you just knew, like, oh, okay, are you cut out for this? When it gets right down to the nitty gritty, and again, you'll find out in international management later that maybe he doesn't like it when it gets to those moments. But Ferguson just cool as a cucumber, just goes, Leeds tried against us. Oh, they tried. Oh, they tried. They're all... Let's see if they try against you, shall we? And you could just...
and that's it. And Keegan cracks. As he says in this famous interview, a lot of things have been said over the last few days. Some of it is almost slanderous. We've never commented. We've just got on trying to pass the ball in training. Now, at this point, a baiting Richard Keys, I think, spots something. What do you mean by that? People having a go at you and your team? Keegan says, I think you've got to send Alex Ferguson a tape of that match, haven't you? We're playing Notts Forest on Thursday. That was fixed up 4 months ago. I mean, that sort of stuff. We're bigger than that, he says, his voice breaking slightly. When you do that with footballers like he said about Leeds, and when you do things like that about a man like Stuart Pearce, I've kept really quiet, but I'll tell you something. He went down in my estimation when he said that. We've not resorted to that, but I'll tell you, you can tell him now. He'll be watching. We're still fighting for this title, and he's got to go to Middlesbrough and get something. And I'll tell you, I would love it if we beat them. Love it. There's a couple of fast blinks, and Kevin Keegan slowly, as his blood pressure begins to drop to normal again. Meanwhile, Alex Ferguson sits at home and pours himself another Sauvignon. Mission accomplished. Phil, I mean, Keegan, he's lost the plot at this stage, hasn't he? It's the football equivalent of watching a comic flailing on stage. It's painful to watch, but there's nothing you can do about it at this stage.
Yeah, it was like you say. I think Keegan is such a great player, a legend of the game, and I think he wore his heart on his sleeve, didn't he? On the pitch, that's the way he played, and that was his mentality. I think that he brought into his passion, brought into as a manager, and I thought he was a very good manager, a very good man manager. And obviously the same for England as well, but maybe he didn't have the qualities as a manager as far as like technical stuff or whatever, or putting it across to the players the way Fergie and the great successful managers, Arsene Wenger and people like that, it got to him at that point, the pressure, and it's understandable, it's human, you know.
What I would like to see, and we're never going to see it, but what I would like to see is the camera go into the dressing room after that interview and have them go, oh, what did you say? What did you say, boss? What did you say? And then just have him go, oh, nothing. Just the realization of what he's done. Because you mentioned, Carl, there, the comedian who's dying a death on stage and goes, I will say anything right now and get off. And then you go, how was it? It can't have been that bad. Oh, it was awful. Oh, it was awful.
Yeah.
He must wake up in the middle of the night still with cold sweats going, oh, I suggested that he thought he paid Stuart Pearce off. What have I done? How?
I mean, yeah, he must have gone in the dressing room and gone, they'll probably cut it. They won't use it. I can't imagine it'll be. What's iconic about that as well? There's a poster for Euro 96 behind it as well, which again, I don't know. There's just something gloriously mid-90s about it, and of course, and I think he even did a couple of adverts, kind of teasing himself about it. Kevin Keegan over the years, so he did have a sense of humour about it, even if he.
Oh yeah, he's brilliant. I think he did a tour last year, and I was lucky enough to support him on one of the dates up in Lancaster at the Grand Theatre, and got to obviously speak to him backstage and stuff. But I stayed and watched his show, and he's a brilliant sense of humour, like you're saying, sending himself up, which is brilliant. But the amazing thing that watching his show was how massive he was. I mean, he was, he won the Ballon d'Or twice.
Yeah.
European Player of the Year 2 or 3 times. Successful in Germany as well as England, and for England, such a great player as well. You just forget, all the adverts that he did, the Brute adverts, and he was as big as Beckham in his day.
People like him, you put Hoddle in there as well, and like if you forget just how iconic these players were, like, as players, and then you go to management. We've got it these days. Gerrard walks in, can't manage for toffee, but as a footballer was fantastic. The thing with the Keegan rant as well, and again, maybe this is just a nowadays thing, because he's wearing just a sweatshirt. It looks so Sunday League. Like, just, I'll love it if we beat them. I'll love it, right? And you know what? He's got to go to get something from Middlesbrough, right? And if he don't, then you know what? We'll let his tires down, right? Like, just if he's suited and booted, that comes across so differently. But because he looks like he's coaching a team at a leisure centre, you just can't help but laugh.
Unshaven.
I tell you what, Ken, go and get the flags back in from outside, will you? We need to lock the leisure centre up.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
Collecting subs from all the. Have you all paid for this week? Yes, I need £2.50 from you. Come on, right?
Yeah.
Tino's been fined again. Well, in that infamous match that Fergie references, that Forest are presumably going to throw, Newcastle do take the lead at the City Ground through Peter Beardsley, but Ian Wone's thunderbolt leaves Newcastle needing snookers. A 2-point deficit and too many goals means that only a Manchester United defeat at the Riverside and a home win against Spurs will be enough on the final day for Kevin Keegan's men. Neither happened. Let's all laugh at Keegan, sing the away end at the Riverside, and perhaps 1 or 2 at home as well. Manchester United win 40 points from 45 in the final stretch of the season, while Keegan's men pick up a disastrous 7 points from 8 games in the early spring that turns the tide. Their 5-game unbeaten run to close out the season just isn't enough. The damage was done by iconic 90s Premier League trio Stan Collymore, Robbie Fowler and Graham Fenton. Now, Phil, the Premier League title returns to Old Trafford. Was this one the sweetest one yet because of the manner in which you won it?
Yeah, that battle, all to come from 12 points behind and then have that nip and tuck battle at the end where it was just, are they going to win it? Aren't they going to win it? Up against such a character as Keegan and his side, and they were so good, Newcastle at that time, playing with flair, etc. And yeah, I think it was just, and I think that was the catalyst of things that were to come, in the rest of the years that followed. Cantona was back, and the rest of the side just had this belief. And I think from this season, we suddenly became what we became.
Of course, had Manchester United not turned that title around, that would have been 2 seasons without a title. Who knows in terms of that momentum? Liverpool are the best of the rest in third, a position they were in for the entirety of the second half of the season, barring a few games after Christmas when they briefly climbed to second. They finished 7 points behind runners-up Newcastle and 8 points ahead of Aston Villa in fourth. Surely the most definitively third-place finish ever recorded. Incidentally, all 7 of their defeats are by just a single goal, with 6 of them coming away from home. Everton inflict their only home defeat of the season, so near and yet still so far from a serious challenge. Tony, that Liverpool side, we've not really talked about them in this title race apart from against Newcastle, but they're also going to go on and lose the FA Cup final in some pretty memorable clobber. Roy Evans perhaps doesn't get the credit he deserves because they were ultimately nearly men, but he really turns around what has been a Liverpool side in decline in the early years of the Premier League, hasn't he?
Absolutely. And he was so close to getting it right. Like, you take those 2 teams out of the league. I know it's not like take Newcastle and Man United out. That's an incredible Liverpool team. Like, but unfortunately, you're playing against a Newcastle team who have never had a Newcastle team as good as that, and may never have a team as good as that. And Manchester United, who are just becoming Manchester United, not Manchester United over here. So, yeah, it's the beginning of something there. And again, we talk about people potentially being a little bit unfancied, unpopular, like Roy Evans. He's not quite glam and glitzy, and we're getting into the mid-90s when things need to be a bit more TV. And Roy Evans doesn't quite have the same appeal, and I wonder whether he's a little bit guilty of that sort of thing, and that's people look at that a little bit further down the line, and that Liverpool team then starts to get dismantled because they move him around. And Liverpool fans know it's another season of, hey, what if?
So, next, we're going to cover the battle against the drop this season with 2 Premier League founder members falling out of the trapdoor. Defending champions Blackburn Rovers get off to a terrible start, where relegation seemed a genuine concern for the first few months before recovering to finish just outside the European spots. Beyond that, it is the same 5 or 6 teams in the mix all season long. So let's cover them now. World Cup winner and Manchester City boss Alan Ball talks of the longest winless run of his career in the opening months and says if hard work is anything to go by, they can get out of trouble. His team have to wait until November 4th, though, to beat Bolton for their first 3 points of the season. They make it to 3 home wins on the bounce by November 25th against Villa to move themselves out of the bottom 3 for the first time since August, but they're rarely above the waterline. There's a great goal from newly promoted Bolton's new signing, Sasa Čurčić at Stamford Bridge, who runs all the way to the away end and celebrates with the fans like they've won the league. They lose 3-2. By the turn of the year, Bolton are bottom and 8 points from safety. Manchester City are 19th and just 5 points separate 13th place West Ham with QPR in 18th. Sheffield Wednesday, Wimbledon, Southampton and Coventry are the relegation-haunted sides in between. Coventry and Southampton draw 1-1 on New Year's Day at Highfield Road with a mazy run from Noel Whelan. Leading manager Ron Atkinson to say the striker is Alan Shearer in the making. Perhaps not quite the case, but a decent Premier League player he turned out to be all the same. Coventry and Southampton are the division's perennial strugglers in this era, and so it proves again. Coventry lose 1-0 at the Dell on Monday Night Football in March. This is before Keegan's rant, I should say. And lifelong Coventry fan Richard Keys asks Ron Atkinson if they can get out of it, and clearly pushes his buttons in a precursor to the famous Kevin Keegan interview. Big Ron says, look, Richard, you can sit there and play with all your silly machines as much as you like. I'm manager of a football team. I'm an experienced manager. If the boys haven't done enough, I'll whip them. But I ain't whipping them for that tonight. A little bit of S&M going on in the Highfield Road changing room. He then asks, who won man of the match? Dave Besson. Oh, sorry. He must have not played that bad then. Thank you very much, lads. See you later. He takes off his headphones and throws them at a production assistant before immediately apologising as he realises that he's probably been slightly out of order. So Big Ron has a precursor to Kevin Keegan's rant. I mean, Tony, Ron Atkinson managed over 1,000 games. He has a 43% win record in that time. He obviously managed both of your clubs. He won a couple of FA Cups, a couple of League Cups. I mean, I imagine he's well remembered at Villa. At this point, his career's beginning to tail off. Is it a case of the game moving on without him, as it had done Cloughy and a few of the big name managers in previous seasons? What do you think?
I don't know. Like, I think the thing we had with Ron Atkinson, and again, I know there's been stuff that's happened since, of course, he's managed Aston Villa. He was great at the time. He was great. He was an old school. I don't know, it sounds horrible to say. He was an old school football manager. You knew what you were getting with Big Ron. He'd turn up. You'd play 4-4-2. He'd get you playing. He'd be able to motivate you. Whether the game was moving on beyond him, I don't know. I think it's maybe a bit too easy to say those sorts of things. Like at the time, we had Andy Gray as assistant manager as well, who left to join Sky. I think that was the biggest loss to Villa than losing Ron Atkinson, because when he went, you could see that there wasn't that link up anymore. Like there was issues in the club in terms of trying to get that tactical nous and awareness happening at the time. So I think that there was people coming in through it, but Ron's such a big character. Like for him to find someone that could work with him would be tricky, I suppose. I mean, Phil obviously, he worked at United, like he'd been there before he came to Villa. Like he knows his way around a trophy cabinet. Yes, he doesn't necessarily know which dugout to sit in. Sometimes that comes later on. I'll just sit here, thanks very much. Oh, when did we sign Dennis Bergkamp? You didn't, Ron. You're in the wrong seat. But at the end of the day, this is still the 90s. Do you want a football manager who these days is now going to be like, suave, turns up from abroad? Or do you want a manager who looks like he's selling you a second-hand car? That's what you wanted at the time. So, Big Ron, jangles.
He claimed that he hadn't kind of got that image. He claimed the media gave him that image while literally wearing sheepskin coats and big gold chains and everything.
I don't know where they're getting it from. I don't know where they're getting it from.
I mean, Coventry do pick up 11 points from their final 6 games with wins over Liverpool, Wimbledon, and crucially QPR to survive by a whisker. Southampton also just survived with a 3-1 win over Manchester United in the final weeks among that final flourish of good form. Thank Letizia for that great kit. And incidentally, Matt Letizia, a man who'd scored 60 Premier League goals in its first 3 seasons, only gets 7 this season, presumably getting distracted when he gets dial-up internet installed and spends his day researching conspiracy theories on the dark web. QPR replaced the goals of Les Ferdinand with Mark Hateley and trust in a front two of Danny Dichio and Kevin Gallen. Despite finishing in the top half in all 3 Premier League seasons so far, including as London's top club in 1993, a 7-match losing spell between Boxing Day and mid-February sees the R's go from bobbing around the bottom 3 to becoming firmly entrenched in it, and they never get back out again. Danny Dichio is their top scorer with 10 in the league. Hateley gets 2 goals in 14 appearances. So going down, it's Manchester City, QPR and Bolton Wanderers. They'll all be back over the next quarter century with varying degrees of success. Phil, you've already mentioned like Liverpool, Manchester United. Liverpool's the bigger rivalry, but seeing your Manchester rivals relegated, I mean, is it a shame you're going to miss out on the derbies, or is it a hilarious fall from grace?
Well, I think at that time we didn't really take any notice of City, to be honest, apart from the derby games. And like I said before, they were that far off the pace and that sort of insignificant at that time, if you will, that Liverpool was our big derby game. It probably is to this day, but even though City have done so well in recent years. But yeah, I don't think we really took much notice of them at that time.
They'll be back within a few seasons after a...
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah, after a short vacation to Division 2. So, so that is the relegation battle wrapped up. We're now going to move on to the goal of the season competition. Now, we have kind of shortlisted 4 of the absolute best. I'm going to talk you through them now and see which ones you guys think is best. I mean, there are special mentions here for Dennis Bergkamp's rasper against Bolton, John McGinley and Teddy Sheringham for delightful lobs, and Robbie Fowler for a neat turn and thunderbolt for Liverpool. But the selections are as follows. There is Tony Yeboah versus Liverpool, the Ghanaian striker hitting Rod Wallace's nod on the edge of the box first time. It cannons in off the crossbar for bonus points. The second goal shortlisted is Tony Yeboah again, this time against Wimbledon, once again defying trigonometry with the chest, knee, and then twatting it in off the crossbar once more. Having walked August's goal of the month, he's about to seal September's 2. Or is it Alan Wright at the Riverside Stadium with his first goal for Villa? An overhit cross from his opposite fullback Gary Charles finds its way to the bombarding left-back, who controls and then hits it into the opposite top corner like Marco van Basten in his prime. The reaction of his teammates tells you just how unlikely a goal it was. Or is it Georgie Kinkladze towards the end of the season this, as Manchester City are heading towards the trapdoor? He does his best Ricky Villa impression from the 81 Cup final. Perhaps frustrated by the standard of football being played around him, he beats 4 men, one of them twice, before going through on the goalie, sitting him down on the muddy pitch and chipping it over him. Out of those 4, who is your goal of the season? Let's come to you first, Tony.
Oh, it's like, you know what? It's a coin toss at this point. It's a coin toss. It's a coin toss between, and can I swear at this point, Carl?
Yes.
It's a coin toss between fucking hitting it blasties, right? Or Georgie Kinkladze. Oh, and you know what? Georgie Kinkladze's got a special place in my heart because I watched that player. I know you're saying there, Phil, like, City insignificant at the time, but they had Georgie Kinkladze. Oh, that man was a little magician. I would pay money to watch him play football. Like, he wins it. Like, Yeboah gets all the credit all the time. Everyone knows about Yeboah. It's like, oh, got it right, bang, right, in it goes. But do people remember Georgie Kinkladze's goal? They should. They absolutely should. I'm going Kinkladze.
It's an incredible goal. Phil, what are your thoughts?
I'm the same as Tony. Having watched it, I hadn't seen it before. So much skill. It was like a George Best kind of moment. So much skill, so much time on the ball. He knew exactly what he was doing and made the keeper look stupid and just brilliant.
And a team that's struggling as well. That's the thing, like he's a little gem in a team that's struggling, granted against a team that were also like not necessarily doing it great, but outstanding goal. And Alan Wright was brilliant as well, but I must have to say, as a Villa fan, yes, it was. But there was no way he meant that at all. He was popping it back across to Gary Charles. Have another go, mate.
A 1-2.
Soz.
I mean, it's quite rare that we get sort of a unanimous decision on this. And as well, Tony Yeboah, I mean, we're just sitting there going, which one of my goals is the winner? But no, we've gone with Georgie Kinkladze's. We will put the link into the comments and you can make your decision at home as well. And just a side note, in one of my numerous kind of near misses, underwhelming near misses with Premier League footballers, Georgie Kinkladze, of course, went on to play for Derby. I went to university in Derby and I was stacking a shelf, ironically, probably sat on the floor, when my mate came past and said, "Did you see who just came past you?" And ironically enough, Georgie Kinkladze glided past me in a Sainsbury's, and I didn't spot him. And he was a little heavier towards the end of his career, as you might recall as well. But
was he wearing a grey strip at the time? Totally missed him.
Got on three people doing the shelves in, just tucks it in past the person at the checkouts. No self-service back in those days. Just bends it into the bottom.
Enough the deli. Absolutely incredible. Going back to the season, and we're going to now cover the managerial changes and kind of major transfers of this season. It's actually remarkably light on managerial changes. Most happen before the action kicks off. Only Colin Todd replaces Roy McFarland at Bolton midway through the actual season. McFarland had only been in charge since the summer after Bruce Rioch had left for Arsenal after leading the Trotters to promotion. Alan Ball swapped to Southampton for Man City in pre-season. Not a great move with hindsight. He's replaced by Dave Merrington, while Kenny Dalglish moves upstairs at Blackburn and Ray Harford takes over. David Pleat takes over at Hillsborough from Trevor Francis and proceeds to sign lots of players he can't pronounce the names of, including Mark de Griezer, Darko Kovacevic and Mark Pembridge. This was a season where transfer fees really begin to climb and the influence of foreign imports becomes more notable. Some of the big moves this season. The English transfer record is broken when a resurgent Liverpool signed Stan Collymore, spending £8.4 million to bring the striker to Anfield. Jason McAteer joins him from Bolton. Newcastle were the season's big spenders and they came so close to securing the Premier League title. Les Ferdinand joins for £6 million from QPR. French national outcast David Ginola escapes PSG for a cut price fee, and Faustino Asprilla arrives midway through the season for £6.7 million. Double league winner David Batty joins from Blackburn Rovers, and the record transfer fee for a defender is broken when Warren Barton arrives from Wimbledon for £4 million. QPR replaced the goals of Celez with 33-year-old Mark Haitley from Glasgow Rangers, and that's going to go about as well as you'd expect. Just a note, by the way, on David Batty. It's widely known that he wasn't that interested in football and just played it because he was good at it. As such, at the age of 54, at the time of recording this, he continues to shun events, punditry, and according to former teammate Ian Pearce, he didn't even show for a Blackburn Rovers title-winning commemorative dinner a few years ago. There was once a rumour that he was a superbike champion under another name and that he was living in a caravan in Filey. But Les Ferdinand confirmed the reality is a little more mundane. Batty is simply enjoying a low-key retirement with his family in Yorkshire, as he always planned to. I mean, can we think of any other colourful backstories for players post-retirement that we can either cast upon them or are that actually true?
I've got one that you mentioned a little bit earlier, and I'm so glad that he played this season. Sasa Churchic, you mentioned for Bolton, went on to play for Villa at one point as well. Fantastic footballer. Went to Villa, went to Crystal Palace, then ended up in the MLS. But his personal life, that's where it gets interesting. After football, Sasa Churchic goes on to Serbian Celebrity Big Brother and wins it.
Wow.
In 2007, wins 50,000 euro. Okay, so he's obviously a bit hard up for cash at this point. He then becomes very popular again in Serbia. He appears in loads of TV commercials with like mobile phone companies and stuff, gets on talk shows, that sort of stuff. Then after that, he then gets invited to take part in The Farm. Do you remember the TV show The Farm that they had on the UK, where it's like celebrities partaking farming activities?
Yes.
And then there was the English one where there was a bit of an issue with one of the people had done some stuff. Sasa Churchic was going to go on the Serbian version of that.
Right.
I'm just going to leave it there as to what's happened because Because he does also end up getting an invite to the UK's Big Brother at some point. He doesn't turn it down. But yeah, quite a weird sort of like celebrity TV lifestyle for Sasachurcic.
I mean, if you know the backstory for the UK version, it is ironic that Sasachurcic was a star for the Trotters there. That's obviously not the final time in his career.
I'm glad I danced around it and you went, that's what we're saying.
Phil, can you think of any off the top of your head?
Vinnie Jones, of course, becoming an international film star. Who'd have thought that? From someone who's a bit of a hacker on the football pitch, became one of the world's biggest movie stars and lives out in LA, living the dream. First started off, and even up till about, I would say, 10 years ago, I don't do them anymore, but I used to do a lot of sportsmen's dinners. I liked working with those old guys. I don't think the players of today, or many of them, do it. Your Alan Ball that you mentioned before, I did a couple of speeches with him. It gave them a second career, after football, because they didn't probably make the money that these guys make now. Suddenly they could go on this lucrative thing and do 2 or 3 speeches a week, and people love to meet them and hear their stories. And I think that was a nice thing to have. And I don't know if those dinners still go on. Do any of you guys do them?
I've done a couple with a couple of referees, which maybe says all you need to know, really. The referees are doing them, aren't they?
The people just shout at them.
Yeah. Turns out that if I do one with a referee, then turns out the referees are actually quite liked, and it's me they don't like. They're like, actually, no, you're fine. It's him. Get rid of him.
They are tough gigs.
Arsenal bring in Dennis Bergkamp for $7.5 million. He gets off to an infamously slow start, doesn't he, Phil? That's quite well remembered that he actually didn't score in those first handful of games for Arsenal.
Yeah, I seem to remember that. Sometimes it takes a while, doesn't it, for these? Obviously he became so good after a while. But when Andy Cole first came to United, after scoring prolific amounts of goals at Newcastle, he came to United. It took him ages to score. It was almost like, when is this guy going to score? That happens sometimes. Sometimes players get a bit, they must feel that pressure that's on them because the expectations, people have paid millions and millions for them, and and as the games go on, unless you score in the first game, if you don't score in the first 5, then you start getting a bit goal shy. And then
you mentioned Bergkamp there, Carl. There's a list. Bergkamp is the start, and I know like all football fans have got a list of players that their clubs missed out on, right? But Bergkamp is the start of a list of players that Villa were £250,000 away from paying to get signed. Like Bergkamp was number 1. Bruce Rioch signed Dennis Bergkamp, just to put that out into the world for everyone to understand. Bruce Rioch went, that's the guy. And again, also at the time, looking at how Bergkamp was playing in Italy, he wasn't setting Italy on fire at that point. But so Bergkamp was being sort of like phased out a little bit. So I think he'd only scored about like 3 in 12 or something like that. Whereas if you did that nowadays, they've paid £7.5 million for a lad who scored 3 goals. What are we doing? Sticking him in. But my word, he revolutionized that Arsenal team. Once Wenger turned up, he must have been like, oh, this is why I'm here. Like, oh, okay, now it all makes sense. But Bergkamp was one of the players in there. There's another player I think we're going to talk about later on, who again was another player that Villa almost signed. Then you've got players like Gascoigne before went to Rangers, and Lampard, of course, famously was about £250,000 away from. But yeah, Bergkamp, if I could have had anybody, Bergkamp would have been my man. Even as a youngster, 15-year-old I would have been at that time, we didn't have number 10s in the Northeast playing at school and like sort of Sunday leagues. I used to try, I watched Bergkamp and I was like, that's how I want to play. Because I'm not big and muscular. I can't win headers. I want to just drop off and play like a nice pass and create some movement, and constantly getting told off by the PE teacher going, why are you dropping off? I'm like, because there's a bit of space here and I can just ping it from 20 yards. That's why I'm going to do it. Get in the box. I'm like, I don't want to get in the box.
You mentioned Gaza there, Tony, going back to what you were saying before, Carl, about Shearer fitting in at United.
Yeah.
Paul Gascoigne, had he have gone to United, I think he would have had a completely different... I mean, he was a brilliant player, don't get me wrong, and a legend of the game, but Fergie he needed looking after, and I think Fergie would have looked after him like he did Cantona. He would have put that arm around him and told him how special he was, which is what he was, and he would have... I think he would have kept an eye on him, which is, what he needed. What a player. The best I've ever seen play live.
Gaz's tears, a seminal moment that actually some link back 3 or 4 steps from the Premier League and kind of the birth of the Premier League and that kind of English football. And that's a whole different show. But absolutely, yeah, Paul Gascoigne, what a player. And we got a glimpse of him in the Premier League era, but not quite at his very best, sadly, at that point. Speaking of another midfielder from returning from Italy, David Platt returns to England from Sampdoria. Sheffield Wednesday bringing Red Star Belgrade duo Kovacevic and Stefanovic for a combined £4.5 million, and Middlesbrough spend £10 million with change on Nick Barmby and Juninho Paulista. Juninho is Brazil's Player of the Year at 22, which, given they had a young lad called Ronaldo coming through at the time, wasn't a bad accolade to have. They opened the Riverside Stadium up to mark his arrival. 5,000 fans show up, plus some Latin dancers arrive from Billingham, truly the home of Latin dancing. There's also a fella who has tied a Borough scarf to a Brazil one in the first ominous steps towards the half and half scarf captured in the wild. Brian Robson says Juninho wants to be the best player in the world. And while that's not something he'll quite manage, Tony, it is remarkable to see Middlesbrough showing such ambition, isn't it?
He's the other player. He's the other player. Like, he was so close to Villa. Oh, what could have been? The little genius. And he absolutely was. He was sensational to watch. Like, again, I don't know like how much people might listen to the podcast might know about this, but when Juninho turned up at Middlesbrough, futsal took off. Middlesbrough was the first place in the country where futsal became a thing. Like,
wow.
Because everyone went, what's futsal? And they went, it's what Juninho plays. So everyone in Middlesbrough went, well, we play that from now on. Then that's what we do. So, like, all the kids in Middlesbrough schools, their PE lessons became futsal lessons. You think now there's a Middlesbrough quite good at getting youngsters out these days from the local area. They were the first ones to do futsal, and it was all because Juninho turned up. And you're right, you've got these flamenco dancers from Billingham. You've got Brian Robson, who, and also, by the way, Brian Robson used to date my mum before he was a footballer. So there's a little,
wow, bombshell.
There's a little one. Also famously recruited in a jacket and shorts and socks combo, which is just... So if anyone's going to put on a show for unveiling someone, it's Middlesbrough. And it was kind of the example of new money at the time, wasn't it? Gibson was going around flashing the cash, being like, hey, come on, we've got the Cellnet Stadium, BT Cellnet. This is going to be the big thing. Like, it's not a thing anymore now, but like, great stadium, like, to play football. They'd come out of Ayresome Park. This little maestro, like, playing next to Robbie Mustoe. Like, what's Robbie Mustoe do? Just give the ball to him. Just let the Brazilian fella have it. And he was sensational, absolutely. But he bought into the era. We say about players and managers getting into the vibe of the fans. Juninho bought into it. There was a Brazilian Parmo named after him. That's like, he was just like, that's what I want. Like, I want, fried escalope of chicken with bechamel sauce on it. And what's Brazilian? Don't know, but it's Juninho's. Like, stick a bit of green in there. That looked like a Brazilian flag there. Give him that.
Robbie Mustoe as well was the player I was imagining trying to grasp futsal in 1995. That's the one. Mark Draper, Gareth Southgate, and Savo Milosevic all joined Villa while shipping Dean Saunders off to Galatasaray. Mark Hughes leaves Manchester United to join Chelsea for £1 million, where he's joined at Stamford Bridge by Ruud Gullit on a free transfer. The checkbook is out at Goodison Park with Andrei Kanchelskis, Gary Speed, and Craig Short coming in. Spurs bring some pace into their attack with Chris Armstrong and Rule Fox joining from Palace and Newcastle. Man City sign a young Jordan called Kinkladze, while West Ham sign Slaven Bilic, Ili Dumitrescu, Ian Dowie, and a 46-year-old Peter Shilton from Coventry. They also promote two 16-year-olds from the under-18 squad, Rio Ferdinand and Frank Lampard. Going back to Shilton for a moment, he actually had 968 league appearances as a professional at the advent of the Premier League in 1992, while playing for Plymouth, who he was player manager of. That doesn't end well, and he returns to playing at 45. He's on the books of 3 Premier League teams as a backup keeper between 94 and 96, Wimbledon, Coventry and West Ham, but he doesn't appear for any of them. After this season, he leaves West Ham for Third Division Leyton Orient in a swap deal with 39-year-old whippersnapper Les Sealey, and makes his 1,000th league appearances for them on the 22nd of December 1996 in a game broadcast on Sky Sports. I think specifically because Peter Shilton's played in it. He retires at the age of 47 on 1,005 league games, but it's closer to 1,400 games in all competitions for a man who made his debut for Leicester as a 16-year-old just a few months before England won the World Cup. Not bad for a bloke who couldn't jump. Tony, who has got the best value from all of that list of transfers that I've mentioned? Like, there's a lot of movement in this season, isn't there?
There is, and I think you'd be tempted to say like teams like you've said Ruud Gullit there, like for £1 million. This was getting into the days when like Ruud Gullit was probably coming towards the end of his career. I think he'd been dominant at Milan, and I think even he questions himself, going, "I'm coming to England. Is it the right time? I'm not sure." But there's this new sort of like flair about Chelsea. Like, you know, Hughes is there. I think Vialli's on his way as well at that time. So it's like Hoddle's obviously there pulling the strings, and then Vialli comes in a bit later. So it's like he's got that, hey, come and play for Chelsea. This would be great. Southgate, I thought, was fantastic at Villa, by the way. I genuinely thought he was a wonderful player. One of those ones that I get a little bit annoyed at when he went to go and play, sign for Middlesbrough to go and get Champions League football. But, you know, that happens. Chris Armstrong, wonderful. Rule Fox, really quick. Who's got value? That's the thing. West Ham, they got Les Sealey, 39-year-old. Like, you've upgraded. There's not often you can upgrade with a 39-year-old. Get that 46-year-old off the books. I've got 39. Les Sealey will come and do a job. Come on. Shilton's stealing a living out here. He's not even played.
Reducing the average age of their squad by shipping out Shilton and bringing in Ferdinand and Lampard, who won't do too badly.
Yeah, and you know what? I bet Les Sealey's not on half as much money as Shilton was either. He's sorted the wage budget out. Off goes Shilton. In comes Ferdinand and Lampard. Get Les Sealey in. Oh, yeah, West Ham have won the transfer window. And they've got Ilya Dimitrescu as well. A
few interesting points here, by the way. Newcastle had a net spend of over £22 million this season, which is obviously huge in that season, with the sale of Rule Fox to Spurs, Alan Nielsen Southampton, and Barry Venison heads to Graham Souness's Galatasaray to make space for funds and attacking talents of Ferdinand, Ginola, Asprilla, and the steel of Barton and Batty. By contrast, Manchester United's net spend was about £15 million in profit. Their only purchase is a sub-keeper from rivals Man City in Tony Coton for less than £500,000. They sell Kanchelskis, Hughes and Ince to effectively make way for the class of 92, establishing themselves in the first team. While improvements to Old Trafford are probably a big factor in this, I mean, Phil, it's remarkable that they never reached for the checkbook this season, even when the gap to Newcastle's 12 points. That's incredible, isn't it?
It's really, when you think of it now, when they start panicking today, if you lose 2 or 3 games on the trot, they're suddenly getting the checkbook out and who can we bring in to save us kind of thing. But yeah, I think at that time, like I say, going back to what we said before, it was the strength in depth at United and the belief that they had amongst themselves, all these young lads and Cantona, etc. Yeah, we never thought, we need to bring extra players in. And I think even up to 10 years after, they were bringing odd players in, like, you know, Sheringham would pop in if we need players, you know, 1 player a year, not 5 or 6, 7 players a year, which has been the case since Fergie packed in. You know, they've just gone stupid buying players, you know.
Because you haven't spent the money this year and you've brought these kids, we'll call them, through. In the summer, you do then panic a little bit and you buy Karl Poborski and Jordi Cruyff, which is perfect advertisements to never buy players from tournaments. Just don't do it. I think Newcastle, obviously, as well, the interesting point there you're saying about when you buy players. Like, Newcastle spent all that money in January to win the league. And everyone talks about Asprilla being the one that didn't quite fit in the system. But nobody mentions that they had to crowbar Batty in as well. Batty was more of a defensive midfielder. And at that time, Newcastle weren't playing defensive ever. Like, they were going like, oh, we have to try and defend at some point. But Keegan almost has this mental block of going, what do you mean we have to be defensive? Like, that's what the defenders are for. Like, well, Batty's a good player. Get him in. Can you play centre half? No, not really. I play defensive midfielder. You're a what midfielder now? Like, yeah. Don't you go talking nonsense around my house, David Batty.
Brings that title-winning Nous, of course, David Batty. I wonder if he was as much brought in for the dressing room, but of course he has very little interest outside of football. You know, it was always said that when he missed the penalty in the World Cup, it kind of couldn't happen to a better person because he kind of shrugged his shoulders as we were all in tears at home. Tony, I mean, this is the beginnings of overseas players making a real mark in the top flight. Bergkamp, Ginola, Yeboah, Juninho, Gullit, Kinkladze. There were players before them from overseas. There are plenty more to come in the summer after Euro 96. But with hindsight, were the fears that it would have a negative impact on the England national side valid? Or can we acknowledge that maybe Gullit joining the league and Barry Venison leaving it is a net increase overall?
Let's be honest. It's taken 30 years for England to get players who are good enough to compete at the top level, right? That's the problem. It's not the foreign players coming in, and it was never the foreign players coming in. The foreign players came in to sell the product, to get more foreign players in, to get more money into the league. That's what it was all about. The players weren't there at the time. They weren't at that level. They were decent players. They were good players. They were coming through at United. They could have been good players. But again, what we've noticed from years and years and years is there was players that all played in a similar position. There was no team. There was no logic. There was always one area that was slightly oversubscribed than others. And I think that players people have to realize that they were brought in because at the time they were better. Like, those players were better. They were coming on bigger money. Like, you're trying to tell me Ruud Gullit wasn't a markup on anybody that was in the Chelsea side at that time. Of course he was. You get to see Ruud Gullit play, strutting his stuff. Granted, he's a little bit off the pace. David Platt coming back, brilliant. We've waxed lyrical about Kinkladze, Juninho. These were like players that were changing how the English media looked at the game, because it was still kind of entrenched in rugged 4-4-2, bad football pitches, elbows out, hard tackles, that sort of thing. And then you get this little diminutive Kinkladze and Juninho running around in the midfield, and you could see these stress head midfielders going, I can't even get close to him to kick him. What am I supposed to do? Like, he just doesn't seem to play a bad pass or anything. You've got 45-year-old Shilton going, it's a young man's game these days. I'm off down the league, down to Division 3, as we call it, Like, it's just, it was just a different time. And it's like, it's for the greater good, I suppose. It does eventually change the game. But yeah, at the time, it was probably going to be part of the national team. But I think that there was a bigger issue in the national team than just, better players coming in the league, especially with someone like Bergkamp. There's going to be players that come in who are going to be better than everyone you've got. But there's also going to be players who are just different and they aren't better. But sadly, that's just the scale of economics, I guess.
So, wrapping up the season, the PFA Player of the Year is Les Ferdinand. Robbie Fowler is Young Player of the Year for a second consecutive season. And the returning Eric Cantona wins the Footballers' Writers Player of the Year. The PFA Team of the Year is David James, Gary Neville, Tony Adams, Hugo Egiog, Alan Wright, Steve Stone, Rob Lee, Ruud Gullit, David Ginola, Les Ferdinand, and Alan Shearer. There's no Cantona. Gary Neville's the only representative for the champions. Eric Cantona does win Football Writers Player of the Year. So a couple of Villa players in there for you, Tony. Just the one Man United player. 1995-96 is complete, with Manchester United winning their third title in 4 years after overturning a mammoth 12-point gap to rivals Newcastle. Liverpool finish a comfortable third. Villa and Arsenal can only be separated on goals scored, with 63 points each in fourth and fifth to complete the European places. Everton, Blackburn and Spurs finish 2 points back and miss out. In sixth place, Everton's case, on account of the Premier League having an additional berth withdrawn after English clubs played weakened teams in the Intertoto Cup. Newly promoted Middlesbrough finished 12th. Wimbledon and Sheffield Wednesday slipped within one victory of the drop, while Southampton and Coventry survived relegation on goal difference alone at the expense of Man City, QPR and Bolton. The FA Cup goes to Manchester United, with Eric Cantona's late volley enough to secure the double for Fergie's men against Roy Evans's infamously cream-suited Liverpool side. Liverpool's all-time top scorer Ian Rush makes a final sub-appearance in that game. Brian Little adds the Coca-Cola Cup to Aston Villa's trophy cabinet to go alongside their fourth place finish in a stunning turnaround from the relegation battlers he inherited the previous season. In Europe, Turin conquer Amsterdam in Rome as Juventus beat reigning European champions Ajax on penalties. Soon to be Premier League import Fabrizio Ravanelli is on the score sheet there. Bayern Munich dispatched Wraith Rovers and Nottingham Forest on their way to beating Bordeaux 5-1 on aggregate to lift the UEFA Cup, while PSG defeat Rapid Vienna 1-0 to get their hands on the Cup Winners' Cup trophy. Some of the big stories in this season. O.J. Simpson's found not guilty of double homicide. Almost 23 million people watched BBC One's interview with Princess Diana. Take That announced they were splitting up. And rival Britpop bands Blur and Oasis released Country House and Roll With It. Tony, we know you were Oasis. Oh, you were Oasis as well, actually, weren't you, Phil? We've already said that.
We all liked both. It was one of those things. It was a media thing, wasn't it? It's all style and substance. That's what the 90s was all about. Create a rivalry from something and just
At the cinema, the top grossing movie of the year was Batman Forever. Casper the Friendly Ghost was the top grossing family movie, and Pierce Brosnan's debut as James Bond in GoldenEye was third. Also appearing in the top 10 were Apollo 13, Pocahontas, Die Hard with a Vengeance, and Dumb and Dumber. As always, a great night in via Blockbuster Video. The music charts were a bit of a shit show, with 1995's top and third best-selling singles being released by London's Burning stars Robson and Jerome. To compound the misery, both were double A-sides, which will mean absolutely nothing to anyone under the age of about 30. Unchained Melody, White Cliffs of Dover, I Believe, and Up on the Roof were all swayed rhythmically along to On Top of the Pops that year.
Shocking.
What a waste. What a waste. People had too much disposable income back then, didn't they?
You had to
pay for your music as well. You couldn't get it for free. People paid hard money for these nonsense tunes.
Yeah. Reluctant pop stars as well, of course, Robson and Jerome. Michael Jackson had 2 of the top 10 selling singles of the year with You Are Not Alone and Earth Song. Coolio's Gangsta's Paradise was the second best-selling song of the year. And while Roll With It might not have outsold Country House, Wonderwall did, despite never reaching number 1. It was kept off the top spot by, you guessed it, Robson and Jerome. So that brings to a close the 1995-96 season. Now, before we let you go, chaps, we do have a game here called Play Your Apps Right. It's pretty simple. Basically, I'm going to give you Premier League players, and you have to tell me if the player I name after them has played more or fewer Premier League appearances than their predecessor. There are 11 players to get through. Whoever is on control of the board at the end of the game is our winner. All will become clear if you haven't heard the show before, but we're going to start with a bit of a 95-96 theme. So what I need is a guess from both of you on how many Premier League appearances only did our first player make. Stan Collymore. Tony, do you want to take us away? How many Premier League appearances do you think Stan Collymore made in the Premier League era?
221.
221, straight in there. Phil?
I'll go 284.
284. Tony, you are closest. It's actually 163 appearances. Scoring a pretty prolific 62 goals in there, which when you consider towards the end of his career, he was less prolific. So, Tony, you have control of the board. Would you like to go first, or would you like to see Phil take us away?
Yeah, go on, Phil.
Okay.
Thanks, mate.
So,
Phil's used to being in front. He's a United fan. I don't want to get a 12-point lead and lose it. You know?
Tony's hoping you clear a path for him here, Phil. Let's see. So your first player was Stan Collymore. Did your next player make more or fewer appearances than Stan Collymore's 163? Sasa Čurčić.
Less.
It is less. 65 appearances for Bolton, Palace and Villa, scoring 5 in that time, including the one he famously ran to the Stamford Bridge crowd in. So our next player on the list, Faustino Asprilla. Is Asprilla higher or lower than Čurčić's 65?
Lower.
You are correct, Phil. It is lower. 48 appearances in 3 seasons at St James's. So you retain control of the board, Phil. Our next player, Jermaine Genius. Higher or lower than 48?
Higher.
It is higher. Quite significantly, actually. 280 for Newcastle, Spurs, Villa and QPR. Our next player, Eric Cantona. Is Cantona higher or lower than Genius's 280?
Higher.
It's lower. 156 appearances, scoring an incredible 70 times and assisting 56 in that time. Briefly for Leeds in the Premier League and then Manchester United. So for the first time, Tony, control of the board switches to you. We are 6 players from the end. We've had Cantona's 156. Is our next player higher or lower? Mikel Arteta.
156. I think higher. Just.
You are correct, higher. It is 284 appearances.
I mean, about 100 is just in there.
284 for Arsenal and Everton, scoring 41, assisting 42. Mikel Arteta's 284. Our next player, Peter Atherton. Higher or lower than 284?
Lower.
It is higher. 318 appearances at the
Wow.
back for Coventry, Sheffield Wednesday, and Bradford. Peter Atherton played in the first 9 seasons of the Premier League, and he made 35 appearances or more in 7 of those seasons. So, Phil,
Wow.
control the board comes back to you. We've got Peter Atherton's 318. Our next player, Kevin Davis.
Higher.
You are correct. Kevin Davis made 500 Premier League appearances, scoring 98 goals for Southampton, Blackburn, and Bolton. Our next player, Kevin Nolan. Did Kevin Nolan make more or fewer appearances than Kevin Davis's 500?
I'm going to go lower.
You are correct. Lower. 456 for Kevin Nolan. 82 goals for Bolton, Newcastle, and West Ham. How does that compare to Ian Walker? Is Ian Walker higher or lower than Kevin Nolan's 456?
Lower.
Phil, you are correct. It is lower. 312 appearances for Spurs and Leicester. He did spend 4 seasons on the bench for Bolton, but never made it back onto a Premier League pitch, which means that, Phil, I would love it if you...
he's got to go to Carl Jones and get something.
We've got one more. All Tony can do now is sit and watch, just as Fergie did. Phil, Ian Walker's 312 appearances. To take the win, Graham Lasseau. Did Graham Lasseau make more or fewer appearances than Ian Walker's 312?
I'm going higher.
Phil, you've gone higher. What would you have said, Tony, out of interest?
Probably is higher, but my gut's telling me lower.
Phil, that famous Manchester United mindset has come through. Graham Lasseau is higher, 327 appearances across 13 seasons in the Premier League with Chelsea, Southampton and Blackburn, where, of course, he won a title. Gentlemen, that brings to an end the show. You've been absolutely fantastic guests. Firstly, tell us where we can find you online or see you live. Tony, let's start with you. Tell us about the podcast and where people can find you.
Appreciate being on. Genuinely, like I say, I've been a fan of the podcast anyway, so to get on it is always been great fun. We do the Football Manager Show. Is the Football Manager Show by The Athletic. It's on all of your podcast platforms. Basically, there's a link in my Twitter, which is of course at Tony Jameson. And you mentioned at the start Football Manager stuff. I do. I stream live on Twitch. About 3 nights a week, where I've got a save on at the minute where I'm trying to win everything in England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. It's going terribly. So if you want to come and have a watch of that, see a 43-year-old man play Football Manager in his bedroom, it's twitch.tv/Tony Jameson FM.
Fantastic. We'll put a link to that in the description as well, so you can find Tony. Well worth watching. And Phil, what about you? Where can people find you online, and where are you on the stage?
Well, my website's phil-walker.com, at Phil Walker Comic, COMIC, on most of the socials, Instagram, Twitter, etc. I try to update the live dates as much as I can on the website, so they can catch me there. I'm doing a mixture of cruises and comedy clubs still, trying to keep my foot in the door on terra firma. Don't want to turn into a cruise cat, but it's where it is at the moment. So, yeah, hope to see you somewhere there.
Thank you both so much for joining me and reliving 95-96.
It's been a pleasure, mate. Thanks for having me.
Loved it. Cheers, mate.
So that was 1995-96 with Tony and Phil. What a season. Quite literally, what a time to be alive. I mean, it was an incredible season, incredible storylines, the first real blockbuster matches that will live forever, that were broadcast to TV screens and pubs across the country and the world. I just think it's such a phenomenal season. It's also happening in the background of a sea change in the UK, in the way of life and politics. Just a really, really incredible, exciting season. And I hope you enjoyed that as much as I enjoyed recording it. And Tony and Phil, of course, are well worth a follow on social media. Go find them and find them when they're next at a comedy club near you. So last week, my guests unanimously picked Asmir Begovic as their greatest Bosnian in the Premier League era. However, you thought otherwise. It was very close between Edin Dzeko and Mohamed Konjic. In the end, Edin Dzeko, perhaps aided by a Champions League goal in the semi-finals while the vote was going on, did sneak the win. Edin Dzeko is your greatest Premier League Bosnian. He had 48% of the votes to Mohamed Konjic's 43%. I think a lot of people had a soft spot for Mohamed Konjic, given the incredible life story that he's got. Listen to last week's episode if you don't know what I'm talking about. But Edin Dzeko is your greatest Premier League Bosnian. Next week, to close out the first series of the show, it is a return to the deserted island matches format with Charlie Edinburgh, son of Justin Edinburgh, the former Tottenham defender who so tragically lost his life almost 4 years ago. Since then, Charlie has set up a foundation in his name. He's fundraising for defibrillators. We found out all about that. We find out about the incredible work he is doing in his dad's name and the legacy that he left behind in football. He was just making a real name for himself in football management when his untimely death came about. And it's a really heartfelt, emotional, funny in places conversation with Charlie and some lovely, lovely memories of him and his dad. So I would implore you to hang around and listen to that one. It really is a lovely show. And that will be our final show of this first series. Now, as I mentioned at the top of the show, that means we're going on a summer break, which I'm a bit nervous about, I'll be honest with you, because we have been building momentum week on week on week on week. Unfortunately, I simply can't keep putting these out every single week. I don't have the capacity to do that. So I'm going to have to take a short break to catch back up. I will be back for the beginning of the 2023-24 season. But I have a favour to ask of you, and it's the same favour I ask every single week, but especially as we come towards this period where there won't be a show. Please share this show with your friends. Please tell everybody you know who you think might like it all about it. We are growing all the time. The reviews are lovely. But what I'm really worried about is losing that momentum when it comes back in the summer. So help me out. Recruit more listeners for me. Pass the pod and let's get a real community of people who love the Premier League and retro football all together. This show is going to be right up their street. So please, if you could do that for me, I would appreciate it. For now, though, that is all from this week's show. Join me again next week for our end of season special. And it is Charlie Edinburgh, a really, really lovely show. Thank you, as always, for listening. I hope you've enjoyed our review of 95-96. There is a back catalogue of previous seasons if you're new to the show as well. I'll see you back here next week with Charlie Edinburgh. Thanks for listening to When Football Began Again. Join us again next time for another slice of Premier League nostalgia. In the meantime, subscribe, leave us a 5-star review, find us on socials, and spread the word with all your Premier League loving mates.